Hello and welcome. This is Anna Orr, host of Community Connections, airing on OROMIA11. Today's guest is AMANE BadhassO, Minnesota Congressional candidate for District 4. This is going to be an episode you won't want to miss. Stay tuned. AMANE, I'm so excited to have you with me today. Thank you for joining me on Community Connection.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm privileged to be here.
I want to go ahead and just jump right in. I don't want to waste any of your time, but I'm sure people that are viewing this are so excited to talk to you, but also hear how the campaign is going and to hear how best we can support your efforts in going forward. Can you just talk to the people that don't know you about your background here within the Twin Cities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an organizer. I was born in a rural village of the Oromia region of Ethiopia to a family of farmers. Okay. So I come from a little bit of on the other side of the continent. Moved here when I was 13, and my second weekend in the state of Minnesota, I was actually marching at the state capitol against human rights violations. And so that kind of got me involved in a lot of things, from youth leadership to organizing, to helping out progressive candidates that I felt were going to uplift our communities. And I have been a lifelong organizer. I've worked with the Minnesota DFL, have worked on several campaigns for the then Congressman Keith Ellison. I have worked with Athena Hollins, my campaign chair, Nelsie Yang, who is the youngest Hmong City Council member. And most recently, before running, I was actually a senior staffer for President Biden here in the state of Minnesota. And so I have a background in organizing, I have a background in research and compliance. But most of all, I am a member of the Oromo community that has quite literally raised me. And so I feel incredibly honored to be able to take their message with me everywhere I go. But I am now running for United States Congress in Minnesota's 4th Congressional District. Probably the first millennial running for office in this seat. And so far, so good. I mean, we are running a grassroots campaign powered by people in the district. And so I have tremendous responsibility to make sure that I take their message with me everywhere I go as well.
Absolutely. Now, you've talked a little bit about being a refugee and living here in Minnesota. How can you talk about how has that shaped your journey?
Yeah, so I think when you are a refugee, you know what it's like to not have much of anything. I wasn't raised by traditional parents, right? I was raised by my grandmother and my uncle and relatives. And so my lens and approach to life is that when you have community members that will support you and guide you, you can go a long way. But certainly I grew up much of my early childhood without much, in severe poverty in the slums of Nairobi, Kenya. And so coming here with nothing kind of showed me what we can actually have if we continue to believe in tomorrow rather than our current circumstances. So I was always overly a bit too optimistic for a lot of people's taste, but this is the Twin Cities, right? We have a lot of refugees. And so in a way, when you come here, you don't feel as though that's only your story, which kind of helps, right? Because when you suffer in silence, a lot of refugees suffer from trauma. A lot of refugees have devastating stories. But I think what keeps us going is the fact that it's not just me. I'm not the only one that struggled in life. There are a lot of people, and I think that sort of empowers you to hope for better.
Now, you've talked about coming from farmer parents to the Midwest. That's not something you hear about too often.
No.
Especially coming so far of a distance.
Yeah.
How do you think that has kind of given you, I guess, a mix of both worlds, per se? How do you feel like that has fueled part of your experience here?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming from, rural Oromia, I've always said the one thing that will sustain you is unconditional love from family members in your community. We're very much in each other's business, which I think is part of East African tradition. But we're also all about helping each other, and I think that's where the organizing comes from. You bear responsibility to not just your family members, but to your community. For example, for me, to the country that gave me a home when I didn't have one. I was incredibly lucky in Kenya to have had, an entire group of folks that supported me, whether it's, giving me money to buy books and pencils when I went to school, or taking care of me when I got in trouble occasionally, and I got in trouble quite often. It's just it's that I hold on to. But in terms of being here in a country where you have a lot more opportunities to build wealth for your family, you have a lot more access to things that you never had access to. But I think both perspectives are so important to me and super critical for the person that I am today, and that I don't want to lose sight of where I come from. I think they're, especially when you are in politics, you can certainly, become a little bit self-absorbed. You can think it's all about you sometimes, right? But it's bigger than me. It always has. And I think coming from, that background has allowed me to really stay grounded and really prioritize the needs of the people that I am hoping to serve, as opposed to sort of my own personal political aspirations. And so it grounds you, and it helps you stay grounded with the community members that have helped quite literally raise you.
You talked about your village supporting you while you come up and you all being in each other's business. But I think it really does take a village to raise a child. And I think we're witnessing, as you campaign for the Congressional 4th District, I think we're witnessing that village come to life. Can you talk to me about what specifically led you to civic leadership? I know you shared a little bit about the responsibility you felt to a place that gave you a home when you didn't have one, but how did that shift from a feeling to actually putting boots on the ground?
Absolutely. So I told you about my second weekend here. So I come from the largest population in Ethiopia. The Oromo people are by nature egalitarian. And so, we lived under a gada system, or my ancestors, I should say, lived under a gada system, an egalitarian system. So I think that was already ingrained in me, that I had to be of service to others. There's this sense of individuality, which I think is just as important, right? It helps you be your own person and have your own ideas and introduce your own ideas to others. But I really value the culture that I grew up in, which is the culture of you always give back. You're always home on weekends cooking for your family, right? You're not absent. And so for me, that second weekend being here, I was actually freaking out because I thought there was going to be armed military guards, as is the case in Africa, right? When folks peacefully march, there's always a military presence. And I started to think, that wasn't the case. And so for me, I felt like, oh my God, I can do a lot here than I actually thought that I could. From getting involved in youth leadership with the Oromo community to doing cultural dances, which I helped a lot of young Oromos who were not born in Ethiopia sort of stay in tune with their culture and with the teachings of their ancestors. And I think with political organizing, I felt as though, no system is ever perfect. For democracy, you have to continuously fight for it, right? This is a country that has its history, especially with its history of racism and dehumanization and colonization. I knew we were not a nearly a perfect union, but that we can be, right? There's a lot that this country has overcome. And for me as a refugee that was given a home here, I wanted to pay it forward, and I did that through organizing and doing my own part and mobilizing and uplifting folks. And I did that through electoral politics, because I thought, the people should be the ones setting the policies, electing the candidates that would eventually serve them. We have a long way to go, but I certainly felt as though I did my part in that endeavor as well.
I believe so. I think so far, I think we're witnessing a lot of it actually take place right now. Now, you went to Hamlin, correct?
I did go to Hamlin.
And you studied political science.
I did.
And pre-law.
I did.
So where did the pivot take place? Because in a couple of shows ahead of this, we have talked about making necessarily pivots when you believe that you're going on one direction, and then you end up somewhere else, and you kind of look back and you go, after a while, I think you see where the dots begin to line up. But kind of, can you tell us about where your dots started to line up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied political science and pre-law, but I would say much of my understanding of politics itself, movement politics, right, which is very different than your traditional politics. I learned that from the community and how they show up for each other and how they fight for each other. I learned that from those who quite literally gave their lives and sacrificed so much for somebody, like me, as a person of color, to be able to lead a life of dignity here. And I went to, when I was at Hamlin, I really wanted to pursue law. And it was through, certain changes in American history from, the Wall Street crisis, right, to seeing the worst of America's racism, right, to seeing a lot of status quo corporate-backed politicians. I spent 2 years after college in Washington, D.C., and it completely transformed how I viewed politics. I knew that being in the courtroom was powerful, and I think for some folks it's great, but I happened to be really opinionated, and I felt as though I, would be restricted in the courtroom, but through organizing and through electoral politics, I could be my own self and I could fight for the things that matter to me. And I also saw it as a way to ensure that folks understood their power, right? Because a lot of the conversation we have in American politics right now is that the corporations get to dictate how things go across our country. But when really, if people really understood their power, the power of the vote is really, really powerful. A lot of people marched and died for this opportunity. And so, it was an easy transition. But certainly, I look back, I'm not your typical politician. I don't come from wealth. I don't come from power. The opposite of it, I am a working class organizer who has lived paycheck to paycheck. I am not your traditional politician, which is why we've done really well in District 4, because they're waiting for somebody new. They're really tired of being sold empty lip service, as I call it, right? They want something real. They want somebody that understands where they're coming from. They want somebody that, quite frankly, understands what it's like to miss a paycheck and really struggle to make ends meet. And so, it was a tough transition, but I think really natural for me. I felt like right now we need a new generation of leaders who understand what it's like to struggle and not, necessarily need their staffers to write them a talking point to understand the challenges of people in the district.
I think you're right about that. Can you just expound a little bit for me about your vision for the Congressional 4th District?
Yeah, so we have a slogan of economic, racial, and environmental justice. And much of that work has already been done by a lot of folks in our district, but across the country. But I envision a very different kind of leadership. We are now in a moment of crisis. From wealth inequality that has gotten far worse. The middle class is slowly disappearing. We actually, in the state of Minnesota and in my district, have the largest wage gap between folks of color and white folks. We have the largest gap in education between folks of color and white folks. And a lot of people don't talk about that. We have a crisis of public safety where we see a brutal police violence against black folks in our district. We also have an environmental crisis. Right now, what we have is a large portion of folks in Washington that have sold out to big oil, big pharma, and those major industries that get to dictate legislative policies. And to address this ongoing crisis, we need folks who are only accountable to the folks that they represent. When I ran this race, I knew that I had to be grassroots funded, not because it was easy. It was going to be the hardest thing I ever did because I'm running against a 22-year established member of Congress. I did that to, first and foremost, have us be accountable to the folks we want to represent. Secondly, to get people engaged, to let them know that they will be essentially funding a campaign that will work on their behalf and not on behalf of the corporate PACs that write the checks of status quo politicians. And as an organizer, right, I wanted to invite a new group of folks into the process. from working class folks on the east side and on the west side who don't have time to organize with us on the campaign trail, but are more than excited to hear about our message of fighting for a living wage, fighting for more union jobs, fighting for access to health care and Medicare for all. That is so critical and important to folks in my district. And so that's what I believe in, and that's what I believe that I will be fighting for. And the challenge with our political system, it's that folks like me don't come this far. We are now about 6 weeks away from the primary, and we endured tremendous challenges to get here. It was not an easy endeavor, from the establishment attacking us, from voter disenfranchisement in the caucus and convention process, from me getting trolls from people within the political power elite in the state. We overcame all of that because the people truly believed that they were ready for a new messenger. I consider my role to be a messenger. A representative is supposed to take the message of the people they hope to represent to Washington and shake things up. And I'm not interested in maintaining the status quo or being silent. I am interested in taking the voices of this district to Washington, D.C., and I believe we've done that on the campaign trail.
Can you talk to me a bit about how you plan on taking the concerns of the working class, like you shared, to Congress? I think sometimes people look at civic leadership in a way that they seem so far removed from their constituents or from the community, like when we saw the clip of Donald Trump being asked about, did he know the price of milk in a grocery store? And it's sometimes I think polarizing to consider what that looks like, but how do you plan on doing that in a way that not only sticks to your core beliefs, but also still represents the people that you're trying to, voices you're trying to amplify?
Absolutely. So I've been organizing for the past 14 years. And every single time I talk to folks, whether they're new, whether it's folks that I have talking to, they want somebody that will host town halls. They want somebody more present in the district than Washington, D.C. Yeah. Unless you're passing legislation that you've introduced every single day, you have to make time for home. They want a coalition builder. They want a listener, not a talker. And they want somebody that is willing to say that I'm not going to be beholden to special interests. They want a non-corporate backed candidate who will serve them and their interest. The other is, as an organizer and as somebody who's lived paycheck to paycheck for most of my life, their struggles are not foreign to me. As I mentioned to you earlier, I don't need somebody to write me up. What happens when you can't make your medical bills? What happens when you can't feed your family, right? We know that, especially since the global pandemic, there are quite literally folks across St. Paul who are renters who are unable to pay their rent. So this isn't a new issue, but I think it's a responsibility of every representative to be more in the district than in Washington, D.C., hosting town halls, understanding the issues, talking to experts, building the coalition, because that's what it takes, right? Relationships with city council members, relationship with state house and state senators, to folks who are literally on the ground at the local level making the important impact. They have to have a partner in Washington, and it can't be a partner that just shows up to take photos. It needs to be a partner that understands our housing crisis. It needs to be a partner that understands that we have a huge wealth inequality across our district. We need somebody willing to actually have the tough conversations, and that's what I think people want. They want somebody present and not absent.
Can you share with me some of the concerns that you've been hearing from the community while you've been out on the campaign trail? Because I'm certain people are walking up to you and happy to have someone with a listening ear hear their concerns. What are they sharing with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was on the east side yesterday. My campaign office is on the east side, Arcade Street. There are 7 businesses that have closed down. 7 businesses that have closed down. And so oftentimes, like, I was getting coffee at the gas station. I was like, would normally introduce myself, and they say, things are just too expensive. Like, we can't make a living, right? We can't continue to live in the way that we are. We're unable to make ends meet. And one of the challenges they have is we've heard a lot of progressive candidates talk about how they're going to transform the economy. How are you going to actually do that when you have majority corporate-backed candidates in office? Which is a legitimate question. I say that because for me, I am a believer in investing in the community. My opponent, Congresswoman Betty McCollum, is the chair of appropriations on defense. And she touts that she has delivered millions for our district. Recently, she delivered on $2 million for police radios. While our small businesses are closed down on the east side, while a lot of renters in St. Paul are unable to make rent because their wages are not over 100K, they're far lower. While a lot of single working class moms are unable to put gas, right, like in their car, etc. So these are the things that I hear, things that a lot of politicians don't talk about in Washington. People are really struggling. People are struggling to an extent where they're not even talking about access to opportunities. They're talking about, like, how am I going to pay for my medical bills? How am I going to pay for a prescription? And it seems redundant that we keep talking about that, but I kid you not, that's the stories that we hear on the phone when we're talking to folks. And I'm a grassroots candidate, so oftentimes I have to ask them for money. And the conversations that I have is, I wish I could give you more money. The last donation that I gave you was out of my savings. I absolutely have nothing to feed my kids with, right? So those are the stories that we hear on the campaign trail. And I think, ultimately, quite frankly, to be very honest with you, we have a lot of work to do, right? We know that we can't go to Washington and overnight transform our economy, but we have to be committed to reimagining our economy and actually building it for the people that need it, rather than the 1% billionaires that benefit from our current economic system.
That's very true. Now, you spoke a little bit about your opponent, Betty McCollum. What sets you apart from things that you've witnessed her traditionally done? Because I know that there has been, like you said, over 20 years she has held this seat. And I know you talked a little bit about some of the lip service and then recently about the $2 million for police radios and things like that. But can you share what your plan is to do specifically that would deviate from that as the new messenger for the Congressional 4th District?
Absolutely. So in over 21 years, we have not seen, the Congresswoman has passed and introduced two legislation. One of them was renaming a post office, and the other was a Healthcare Protection Act in 22 years. As an organizer, I've seen her absence, whether it is showing up for other candidates across the district, whether it's hosting town halls on important stuff that she has signed on, or having conversations with folks like me. I understand she's been in Stillwater, but certainly not in my area of the east side or the west side. So I envision a very different kind of leadership, one that is present, one that will prioritize working class people who are struggling, and not necessarily just show up during election cycles or conventions twice a year. In addition to that, my opponent she has taken over $2 million in corporate PACs and defense industry money. I am not interested in funding endless wars or weapons. I am interested in funding schools and pencils. I am interested in funding the small businesses that have closed down across our district. I am interested in ensuring that we close the wealth inequality gap. I am interested in ensuring that our young folks in our district are able to see a future for themselves, right? That they have a future in our district. I am interested in taking on mass incarceration in this country that have devastated our Black community. And so that, I think, is a broad distinction of who I am versus who she is. But I think more importantly, it's about a new generation of leadership, right? We've had a lot of politicians in Washington that have served for decades. And the issues we face today didn't happen overnight, right? None of the stuff that have happened, all the crises that we face, didn't happen overnight. And I know for a fact that folks are fed up with the same talking point, with the same strategy of, just get along with the system. Don't call it out. It's good the way it is. But who is it good for? Certainly not the working class folks of this district. Certainly not for the young millennials who are barely unable to get food, where they have to decide whether they're going to pay their student loans or whether they need to move back in with their parents, right? We need a new approach. We need to reimagine our systems, and we need to uplift folks out of poverty, and we can't do that by just getting along with the status quo.
we've talked a little bit about addressing healthcare. We've talked about addressing education and currently the state of the world, basically, with the climate crisis and things like that. We talked also earlier about the migrant community booming here in Minnesota. What is the vision that you have to see them coming here and feel not only more welcomed, but able to make it home? I think we have had a president that was interested in closing off a lot of our borders and isolating and alienating a lot of people and not offering liberty and justice for all. And so what is the vision that you would like to see for more people, or for a young lady like yourself that would be coming over here and want to make a life?
Yeah, so I am a believer in a humane, just immigration system. Because you can't call yourself a democracy when you want to dehumanize people fleeing war and conflict. I didn't choose as a 3-year-old to lose my mom and not grow up with her, and to lose everything that I've ever known, to be a refugee, because that's the life I chose. 100%, if not over 90% of refugees never choose the fate that they choose, right? They either have to leave their homes due to their lives being at risk, or due to the lives of their families being at risk. And so I believe the current systems we have in place are not humane and just. For example, I believe in abolishing ICE, because ICE is known to commit gross human rights violations on American soil. I believe, especially when you look at District 4, we have a thriving, former refugee population here. They believe in America, or the promise of America, right? They believe that this is a place where they can go about their lives, be able to take care of their families, be able to raise their children and give them a better future. But we know we have a long way to go, so I'm committed to making sure that our immigration system is just. I am committed to ensuring that, immigrants across our district who don't have access to opportunities or who don't have access to funding have the necessary funding to be able to sustain themselves and their families, because I know how hard it is to be able to actually build wealth when you absolutely don't come from wealth at all. In addition to that, I am a believer in that the incoming population and the folks that have been there for a very long time throughout generations need to build a more strengthened relationship, because what we see across this country, especially from the far right, is pitting black folks and immigrants against each other, when really those are the folks that have to unite, that have to hold on to each other to be able to survive in this country. And so I'm committed to using my own personal experience and narrative to connect with them a little bit more, to build trust and to let them know that they belong. I will tell you, when I first moved here, for a very long time, I wasn't sure whether I belonged. Right? I was lucky enough to have the community here that made me feel like I belonged. But I'm sure those are to some very small challenges, but to me, I know goes a long way if you feel as though you're finally home and that people are welcoming to you. And so I will legislate through that lens, which I think is really, really critical.
Now, we've talked about a vast array of topics about civic leadership and about your background, but how are you taking care of yourself as you navigate the campaign trail?
I drink a lot of coffee.
Okay.
I really, really have a lot of incredible folks in the community that honestly babysit me.
Okay.
Through mentorship, I think it's especially when you go from a working class organizer to a candidate for federal office, where you have to navigate a lot of these spaces of power, where you have to navigate your own worth. Which oftentimes, we do as Black women, especially in running for office. There just isn't enough resources or support. And so I have my folks that babysit me, from the pastors in our community to the imams in our community, to the young folks that I grew up with who, we were part of youth leadership together, and now they're just working class folks, but are there for me and super supportive. So they keep me grounded, and I think that's my self-care as I get through what will be a very challenging next 48 days. So, yeah, and then, I eat
Good.
comfort food.
Good.
And it helps.
Good. That's important. I think we need to know a little bit more about who we have sitting in our congressional seats. So it's nice to hear more of a fuller picture, but also that you're taking care of yourself because this is a marathon. We know it's an election, but this is a marathon. This is, once you win, if and when you win, it's going to be continuous. So it's nice to hear how you're taking care of yourself and how you're staying connected. Can you share with me one final message that you have to those viewing?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anna, for being with me today and for having me on your show. I am so incredibly honored. It was a wonderful conversation, and thank you to OROMIA11 for inviting me to share a little bit more about my platform and about my candidacy. My name is AMANE BADHASSO, and I am so honored to be running to represent the working class families of Minnesota's 4th Congressional District. I am an organizer, I am a campaign staffer, but most of all, I am a proud St. Paulite. I am running for Congress because working class families have been left behind. And so if you share our vision for transformative change, for racial justice, for economic justice, and environmental justice, I want you to visit our website at amaneforcongress.com and register and sign up so that you can help us activate and mobilize working class folks across District 4 so that they can send a champion to Washington, D.C. to work on their behalf. Thank you so much, and I'm so honored to have your support.
It has been wonderful to talk to you on Community Connections,
so much.
And I look forward to witness what takes place after the primary.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That is all the time we have today. I want to give a special thanks to Congressional District 4 candidate AMANE BADHASSO and her wonderful campaign team for speaking with us today. Please make sure that you are going out and doing your homework to figure out which person is best to be elected for your area and your family's needs. I look forward to chatting with you again soon.